911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Sasquatch Odyssey. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us for the show. It is Friday. We've got a great guest lined up for you, but as always, I want to start by inviting you. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You can get me at brian@sasquatchodyssey.net. If you haven't already done so, go over and check out the premium content section. You can become a member there. I do want to talk to you guys a little bit about that. I've mentioned this over the last couple of weeks about the premium content and the memberships. I've changed the way that I'm doing the memberships a little bit, guys. I've lowered the monthly membership to $3 a month. You guys get early access to the show. You get access to the entire back catalog of the show commercial free, and of course all the future shows will be posted for you guys in the members area commercial free as well. You get extended interviews and content. You get access to the blog when I do the blog posts. So it's less than a cup of coffee, but it does a ton to keep the show on the air and keep you guys coming back for the great interviews that we have and the stories that we share with you guys week after week. So if you feel so inclined, go over and check that out. I want to do a couple of shout outs real quick. We've got a donate button on the website and you guys have answered the call greatly since last week. I want to thank a couple of people for their donations. We've had 2 donations since last week's show. Richard, thanks so much for your $5, man. It means a lot. I really appreciate it. And a special shout out to Brad, who donated $200 to the show. Most of you guys know I've mentioned it in the past. I haven't talked about it much over the last couple of weeks, but we're actually taking the show to Gatlinburg, Tennessee to attend the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. And that's going to pay for our trip, basically. So thank you, Brad. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for putting your money where your mouth is. Thanks so much for supporting the show since day one. I'm starting a new show, guys. I'm not going to stop doing this show. This show is going to continue as it has, but I wanted to do a show that's dedicated to the paranormal, the UFO encounters, the ghost encounters, some of the more out there dogman encounters, and some of the other things that aren't really Sasquatch related. It's called Paranormal Odyssey. And we're going to launch that maybe this week. I don't know. Maybe next week. You guys keep an eye out for it. It'll be Paranormal Odyssey. It's got a cool logo that Happy Squatch Studios designed for us. It's going to be a little alien standing under a UFO with a beam coming out of it. Pretty cool stuff, man. So I hope you guys check out the Paranormal Odyssey if you're into that sort of thing. I said we've got a great guest lined up tonight. We've got none other than Tom Sewid. He is from the Kwakwak Ewok First Nations tribe, and Tom has some amazing stories to share with us tonight. He's going to talk about the First Nations perspective and some of the history on the Junakwa, as you'll hear him talk about, or the female Sasquatch and Bigfoot Sasquatch in general. Some of the coolest encounter stories, so you guys make sure you stick around for that. Tom's ready to go. He's on the line, so I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn the music up, and you guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. welcome to the show, Tom.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I've been excited to talk to you. So I want to just get right into it, and I want to start talking about the First Nations perspective on Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and your experience in that growing up in the First Nations tribe. And if you would just sort of tell us a little bit about that experience growing up.
Sure. I actually come from the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe. It's from northern Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. And I grew up there was born and raised for the first part of my life on a small island called Alert Bay, which is half Indian Reserve and the other half is just a regular town. But it's right at the mouth of what they call the Broughton Archipelago, which is my traditional tribal territories. Raised as a commercial fisherman. You'd see the totem poles with the base figure being sleepy-eyed, pendulous breasts, puckered lip, outstretched arms, female Chonahua, female Sasquatch. And it was in our graveyard and on the world's tallest totem pole up at the top of the island. And in the shadow of the world's tallest totem pole is the ceremonial big house. And it was there when I was a kid. It was built the year before I was born. But inside there, the house posts that are all beautifully carved with thunderbirds and eagles. You see the Chonahua on one of them, and right where the chiefs and the drummers sit up at the head of the big house during our big ceremonies. But when you went to Potlatch, you would watch chiefs open up their family's box of treasure. It's called a gildas. And it's just all of the crest songs and dances that they have title to. And every family, that through the year you'd have 3 to half a dozen potlatches, and we'd all go up there and you'd see the Chonahua, the wild woman of the woods, the female Sasquatch, being danced and the song being sung according to that family's ancestor, what they witnessed. So that's what I grew up with right away. And, we were brought up that you behave yourself. Otherwise, that Chonahua, that female Sasquatch, always watching. And if you misbehave or act up, the Chonahua is going to come at night with big hairy arm, my dad would say, and reach in the window and grab you and rub spruce sap from the tree in your eyes like syrup so you can't open them. You're blind. And she's either going to put you in a sack or in a basket on her back, and she's going to carry you in the woods where she boils you up and eats you. So as a small kid, I was terrified of the Sasquatch. That was our boogeyman, our monster, and it kept us kids on track. And later on in life, I would bring my kids up, understanding that and believing in that. And through my life, though, I was a commercial fisherman. 45 years plus I've been doing it. But my beginning years as a kid and teenager, I traveled all over British Columbia's coast. And I was always Tommy 10,000 questions. Hey, what do you guys know about Sasquatch, Bigfoot? And other tribes and other people who fished in other places would share their stories or stories they heard. And it was just like a treasure trove of information you would hear from the fishermen. And even when I was a young man sitting in saloons when we were in port in different parts of British Columbia, Southeast Alaska, when I fished up there, I would always ask about the Sasquatch, and there was always someone going to have a story about it. So it was sort of interesting to me. And then in the mid-1990s, our commercial fishing industry in British Columbia, salmon, collapsed. So instead of going to the unemployment lines and doing like everyone else, being retrained for different jobs, I chose to go into ecotourism. And I went to under my chief and council's order to an abandoned native village of ours called Vimquamlis, or Mamalalakula, village of the last potlatch. And that village island that we had an old totem pole lying on the ground that had fallen down. And it was a grizzly bear on one of the forms carved at the bottom. But on the paws that were held up were Chonahua, the face of the wild woman of the woods. And I knew the pictures from the famous artist that went there in the 1920s, Emily Carr, and she painted the welcoming poles, which were Sasquatch, Chonahua, and all the stories about it. And I didn't think about it. I just living out in the bush, being a native watchman in the summer. And a couple of second year into our watchman program, we had an encounter with a Sasquatch. And one of my workers saw it, heard it, and I seen him get alarmed when he was outside of our cabin. And I grabbed the guns right away, and we went in the bush, and I was asking him, what was it? And he's like, It was a big bear, big bear. And then it wasn't until the next day when we packed up our camp and we were leaving on this big boat that he told me, he goes, Tom, that wasn't a bear. It was a Jonah, it was a Sasquatch. And, so that's just kind of intriguing. And then the following year, my worker and I, he was a crewman on my fish boat with two other people, a salmon seine boat. And we went into the village island and we anchored out in the bay where my cabin was. And just after dark, we heard something hit the side of my cabin. Like it was a trailer, a 26-foot trailer with a 10 by 10 cedar wood addition. We heard something hit that trailer, a big bang. And we saw two big shadowy vertical forms go past the trailer. And we ran to the wheelhouse. I ran to the wheelhouse. My crewmen ran on the bow of the boat. And we put the spotlight on. And lo and behold, there were two Sasquatches, a big male and a big female. And we had the spotlight on for well over 20 minutes. And we tried making them move and everything, but they would not move. They were just, the female was on her knees in a fetal position with her butt facing us. And the male was in sort of scrub brush, but he was on his knees and his knee, and his arm was in front of his face because you could see the eyes reflecting, two eyes, 1.5 eye, one eye, two eyes. You could tell it was, I guess, breathing or moving. And we could see the reflections of his eyes, and the female, we could see the reflection of her right eye poking under her arm, looking back towards our boat. And it was, it was amazing. We turned the spotlight off after 20 minutes, and you could hear them walk into the brush, and it pushed over a big dead tree. And the next day when we investigated, it was a dead hemlock about 6 inches in diameter and about 35 feet high that it had pushed down from the forest towards us. An hour and a half later, after charging the batteries on my boat with my main diesel motor, we shut that off. My crewman Trevor, who was with me as a watchman, he was in his sleeping quarters downstairs. He was scared to come up. My girlfriend Cook, she was sleeping, but me and this other native crewman were on deck still, and it was probably about 2-3 hours into dark now. And that's when we spotted that big Sasquatch again, and I put spotlight on and caught the back of his shoulder and back as he was disappearing into the bush. So it was about an hour and a half experience. That really made me a believer that, the Sasquatches were out there. And all the stories that I heard as a kid from my native side and the other fishermen, and the native legends and stories and carvings and totem poles and paintings and regalia being brought to life in dance and song with a max, it all came to be that, yes, my ancestors were telling the truth. There's the other tribe out there, what I call the big fellas, or the big hairy ones. And, everyone else knows them as Sasquatch and Bigfoot. But that's how I became a firm believer. And then after that, the rest is still history being made. I've had numerous encounters with them, living out in the bush for over 26 years. And I just got orders today that I have to leave Kent, Washington and go back to Vancouver Island, where I'm going to be out in the bush for the next 2 months. So hopefully I have another encounter. So that's how I became a believer of Sasquatch.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So during that first sighting and encounter with them, what did they look like? What kind of description can you give the audience to let them know that's never seen one? What it was that you saw as far as size and details?
Exactly what Mr. Patterson and Bob Gimlin filmed in 1967 in Bluff Creek. That's exactly what I saw, and other times exactly what I saw. And yeah, I do know there's a lot of listeners out there going to say, well, ours down here looks like a orangutan and ours have canines and so forth. All I can speak about is what's here in Washington State and British Columbia that I've seen, and they just look like what the Patterson-Gimlin film is. But when I was investigating in the Omaha Indian Reserve in Macy, Nebraska, 3 years ago with Lucas White, I saw two, what they call Sitonga, their Sasquatch, in a FLIR Scout 2 mono FLIR scope at about, I would say under 100 yards. They were walking across a freshly planted soybean field. The soybeans were about 2 to 3 inches high, so I could really see from the roadway. And in that FLIR, I saw two Sasquatches, one very pronounced pregnant one, and a large male that was probably about just over 7 feet, I guess. But one thing that really caught me was their lips. Their bottom lip was really like a hang lip. It sort of had that, what you see a caveman Cro-Magnon type picture of that sort of, not too smart look about it. That's what caught me with those ones in Omaha. And I believe it's from inbreeding because they're sort of this enclave of wild hardwoods is within the Omaha Indian Reserve, but 360 degrees around it are all the modern corporate farms and everything that are just clear cut in fields. And I firmly believe that there possibly could be some interbreeding problems within the Omaha Indian Reserve, but that's a whole other episode.
So you said you had multiple encounters with these things over the years. Are there any other encounters that have stuck out in your mind as some of the most prevalent that you recall from your own personal experiences?
2006, my sister and two of my workers, I built cabins, 5 cabins that are reminiscent of miniature West Coast Indian longhouses with native designs painted on the front. They're made of cedar. Well, I was running sea kayaking trips with orca whales there, and I had a 32-foot, 12-passenger aluminum water taxi tour boat, which I called my water Lamborghini because it was the same price, and it used to handle like the Lamborghini on the water. But anyway, we went there in August of 06, and I had an encounter there a year before in 05 when I was building a porch on one of the cabins. I brought my 5-year-old son down there and my dog, and dog got up, hackles. He was bush trained, golden lab cross. He's walking down the beach towards my son, and I'm following him with my 30-30 along the right hand side of my body. And as we're walking down, I'm looking to my left where the dog's looking. And as I got further down the beach, 60 yards to my kid, because it was low tide, and he was playing with, rolling rocks over for baby crabs, just being a 5-year-old boy. And as I walked down and looked up on the bank of the hill was, no more than 100 yards from me was this big brown cinnamon colored Sasquatch male standing there looking at my son. And as I walked down right close to my son, I could see that Sasquatch side profile perfect. And his shoulder was just massive. He's like a big linebacker and long hair. And you could see his face with no hair, and it was kind of tan colored. And I just looked at him in my language. I said, "Yo, Weeksas, Jonah, hello, I don't know who you are, Sasquatch. You leave my Weesabidu, my little boy, alone. He means no harm. Don't take my boy." And that Sasquatch just looked at me and it sort of growled and gruffed. Didn't show its teeth, but it smiled a bit, I guess I could say. It wasn't a full-out grimace. It was a half grimace, half smile. And then it just turned and walked away up the hill into the forest. And, it was a pretty big bugger. So I got to see a real good look of him. And, all the reports that you see where like art, when you see art, you see people who do these wood carvings and drawings of Sasquatch, and it has a full pronounced Harley Davidson riding beard on it. That's not what I've noticed with the Pacific Northwest Sasquatch. They're more like us Indians. I'm 56 and I'll never get a beard. It'll just grow stubble about 2.5 inches long at the most, but it'll be very dispersed so you can see my skin. That's what I found with that Sasquatch when I saw him. Looked just like one of us Indians trying to grow a beard, a waste of time, basically. But it did have a slight mustache, a little bit of a goatee was there, but the cheeks and the side of its mouth and that were all bare, beige colored skin, and it just turned and walked away. And, that was that encounter. But then I guess that was 2012. I was up if people look on a map of Telegraph Cove, it's world famous orca whale and grizzly bear and sea kayak launching zone on northeastern Vancouver Island into what we call the orca realm and all that. But right in that area, there's a place called Compton Island, like Compton in LA. And that's my Indian reserve, 247 acres. My chief and council asked me to build 5 more cabins there like mine in 2012, 2013. And in 2012, we were doing some clearing, and we could, smell them and hear them and see our garlic was being missing from our outside kitchen area. So we knew there were Sasquatches about in early September into October. And we did see one up in the forest, and we were using a Bushnell 3x9 scope and no gun. We just had the scope, and we're using that to look at it. And we saw a pretty big male, but it was in the shadows, and you couldn't really see anything definitive. But then the following year in 2013, had these cabins pretty much fully built. We're just finishing them off, and we're getting probed again. And things were being thrown at the crew when I wasn't around, and you could see the trails starting to open up in September all around our camp, where these Sasquatches were basically probing our camp and going after our garlic and our apples. So I told my crew, the two other guys, to be wary. And our carpenter, he got so scared of the Sasquatch that he packed his tools up and left. He wasn't a native guy, but he didn't finish his contract. He got Willie's scared there when the Sasquatch showed up, and he quit on the spot. And we laughed because it took two of us to pack his toolbox out of the speedboat when he arrived, and it took just him to pack it back in. He was so scared. So it was pretty funny. But that same time, I was on one evening, it was just me and one crewman. I went outside of our cabin to have a cigarette, and we hadn't built the patio yet. So it was just a stringer 12 by 12 underneath the cabin with about a 4-inch overhang that I was standing on. And I was about a foot and a half off the ground, and I was under what little roof was above me, because the roof didn't have much of an overhang, maybe about 6 inches. And it was drizzling, so I was trying to pressed against the wall, having my smoke. And I seen the stick. It was, breezy, but I seen the stick come horizontal out of the bush and land just off beside our cabin. And I thought, okay, that's odd. I know what that's about. So I threw my cigarette butt down on the ground, and I walked along the side of that cabin, and I jumped out and spun 180 to look at the forest, because I was, front of the cabin looks at the water. But when I landed on the ground, even before that, there was this juvenile male Sasquatch, probably about a little over 6 foot. He was lanky like a teenager pup kid is, and blackish brown hair. And when I landed on the ground, I went, hey! And it looked at me. My eyes went big. His eyes went big. His mouth dropped open, and he just turned 180, and he was, boom, gone. Disappeared up the trail and veered to his right into the bush. And I'm laughing away. I ran into the cabin. My worker, the eyeballs were huge. He's all scared. What's going on? I told him. He goes, you quit picking on those Sasquatches. I said, I'm not picking on him. I said, I just scared him. That's all. I said, he was trying to sneak up on us. So we laughed about it. And I'm not afraid of them. I know they're not going to do me no harm. So I went to sleep. But the next evening, I thought, that bugger, that seems to me like that young guy's trying to probe our perimeters. And what I think is the big one we saw a few days ago, that's his dad. And his dad probably knows me, because I've lived out there for 25 years. That big Sasquatch has probably smelled me, seen me, spied on me. And he probably told his boy, that's the way I looked at it, that, if there's a human you're going to sneak up on, it's going to be that guy there, meaning me. If you can sneak up on him and steal his garlic and apples without him knowing, you're doing a good job. So when I put the jig on him and I spooked that Sasquatch, I kind of thought, he's probably going to have to come in again and try to probe our perimeters the next night. So just before dark, I slipped out the window, and with my shotgun, I crawled with camouflage clothes on through the bush, and I deliberately had piled leaves and branches for what we call October monsoons to come, so we can light all of the brush that we'd cleared from this area where we built these cabins. But I did it strategically so I could use them as berms to hide me when I snuck out of the cabin. And that night when I first did it, I snuck out and I went to the entryway into the forest, which led up to the inland trails into the island, as well as our outhouse structure behind camp in the bush. And when I snuck into this pile of leaves, I scurried in it feet first, and I buried myself, and I had my cap buried with leaves, so just my eyes were showing. And I'm hiding in this pile of leaves, and it wasn't 20 minutes when I could see this black-colored shadow Sasquatch walking towards my camp through the forest, and it was deathly quiet. Like, you couldn't hear it at all. And you see him stop and smelling around because I'm on the upwind. He's got the advantage of being downwind. So he must have smelt me, because he was kind of looking around and smelling. And he come a little closer, and as he got to the edge of the trees where the trail is, it's an old skidder track where they used to drag logs down the hill from to the water back in, I guess it was the 40s when they logged that island. But it grabbed this alder tree about 5 inches thick, and it leaned with its into the trail with its right leg, and it's looking at the back of my cabin, and it's leaning, and that tree's bending, and its right foot steps on the trail, which is probably not more than 5 feet from where my feet are in this pile of leaves. And as he's just about to relax, I come shooting out of the leaves, and hey! And that Sasquatch just jumped and looked at me with these big eyes, and it just pulled that alder tree with its left hand, and you could see it bend, and it hit the top of the berm, and it just took off through the forest. And it's like mad. You could hear it. Rah, 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 and it's just steaming through the forest. And you could hear snap, crack, boom. It wasn't being quiet. And that alder tree's whipping back and forth a little bit with leaves falling down. And I'm coming out of the leaves laughing my head off because I just put the jig on the Sasquatch again. But that's one time I really got to see the facial features. And that one didn't have a pronounced mustache. That's why I call it teenager. It didn't have a pronounced goatee. It had a little bit of long hairs here and there as like a beard trying to be produced, but they're only about 2 to 2.5 inches long. But its face was a lighter tan. And you could see it wasn't as wrinkled as the other ones I'd seen, the older ones. But this look of its face when it saw me spring out of those leaves, its eyes went wide, and you could see they were white like ours around it, and the pupils were black and brown, like a real hazel colored brown. But that's the closest ever, I guess you could say I got to one, but it's something, it's a lot of fun putting a jig on them. I don't recommend it to everyone because we know the stories about the rogues that kill people, but that was my experience, having fun with them out in the bush. Didn't have TV. You got to do something to entertain yourself.
I have to say that takes a set of balls to scare a Sasquatch. I've never talked to anybody who's actually scared one. So that's an awesome story.
I was a grizzly bear hunting guide for 24 years. I used to take a lot of Safari Club International clients out to get their big trophy grizzly bears in British Columbia. So, like I say, I'm a bushman. I lived out there. It's nothing to fear but fear itself and your imagination.
So you mentioned earlier when we were talking about some of the stories that you had heard in the past. Are there any stories that you heard either from the First Nations people or any of the other people that told stories about Sasquatch that have stuck out in your mind over the years?
Geez, I guess the best one would probably be John Green's book, Sasquatch is Among Us, I think it's called. I remember reading that when I was a teenager, and man, that had some good stories, like the Happy Camp one, where the California, where that guy was finished the logging day and he's driving back to camp, big storm blowing, rain, and he's going down this hill, and he looked up to his right and he's seen something leaning against a tree, and he didn't think nothing of it. And he got further down the hill, and there's a blowdown tree across the road, so he got out of the truck. And then all of a sudden, as he's, at the front of the truck trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do here? Turn around and go the long route back to camp, or, chop this tree out of my way. Can I do it? And all of a sudden he heard something, and he looked, and in the brake lights the park lights of the back of the pickup truck, he saw this big Sasquatch running down at him, where it came down the driver's side. He couldn't get in the driver's side. He ran around to the passenger side, and the thing's coming after him again. He ended up making it into the driver's side. And the next thing you know, he woke up and he was in Happy Camp, the main camp. And everyone was teasing him when he woke up. What'd you do to the truck? Were you drunk last night? And he went outside, and here the front end of the truck's all, dented up and stoved in. And leaves and branches are sticking there. So he didn't know what happened. He blanked out. And he doesn't remember anything from that incident of getting in the truck and putting it to gear and taking off. But he did mention in the story that it felt like it was hanging on to the blocks of the truck, where, the tires were spinning till they finally got traction, and he took off and hit that tree and, made it to Happy Camp. But he was so freaked out, he blanked out. And that was one of the most, I guess you could say, poignant stories I read, because, to me it resonated. It was pretty cool. The guy got scared. It's a logger. You don't hear too many loggers talk about Sasquatch. But here's a really good story that was recorded back in the 60s. But then in early 90s. I was out at that village island doing my watchman duties, and all I can say is I had a 32-foot Canoe Cove cabin cruiser at the time that I was living on. I wasn't staying in my trailer with the addition anymore because I'd had too many trouble with Sasquatch and being alone. I knew it wasn't wise to be there by myself because it's just a trailer, a big hairy arm come through those windows at any time. And I was always hearing them and smelling them, hearing them when I was by there by myself, cooking my dinner on the campfire or something at day's end. So I lived on this boat. Well, one evening I had the boat about 4 miles away from that where my trailer was, but that bay is notoriously known for cockles. It's a type of clam that looks like a scallop, and it's the favorite food of Sasquatch, called Jonahua to our people, and Bukwus, the little people, the stick men. Whole different episode, little people. But anyway, it's the favorite food of the Sasquatch, but it's also the favorite food of Tom. And it's middle of September. There's an R in the month, so the shellfish are good to eat. And that evening, I'm like, wow, it's going to be a really big zero low tide just before dark. I think I'm going to go to Native Anchorage where the trailer is. And what I do is I get into the bay, which I did. I have hip boots on, so I jump out of my speedboat and have the leg lifted. So I'm only drawing maybe 4 inches of water at the most. And with my painter line, I'm over around my waist. I'm walking in the water, and there's eelgrass, which is like green onions, but about 4 or 5 feet long plants. And there's only about a foot of water. And as I'm walking in there, I'm kicking with my feet, and I'm looking for these shellfish called cockles that are just lumps in the sand or you're on top of the sand. I bend down, pick them up, throw them in my speedboat. That's what I was doing. It was, like half hour before dark. All I remember is I saw a very long-legged black bear. That's all I can recall. And from the point of seeing that long-legged black bear on the opposite towards the shore from me on my right-hand side towards the cabin area of the beach at about 60, 70 yards. That's what I recall. I can close my eyes and I can see it. A long-legged black bear walking in the shallows of the sandy beach with eelgrass, and that's it. Next thing you know, I woke up and I was in my speedboat anchored out in a bull kelp patch about 2 or 3 miles away from that bay. Middle of the night, fog's coming in. I wake up and I'm like, cold because I just had a t-shirt on, and fog's coming. It's pitch black, and I'm like, where the hell am I? And I'm trying to get my bearings. I don't have electronic navigation. So I whistled, and I could hear an echo to my left, and looked at my compass, and that was due south. So I started going slow bells in the dark with my flashlight. And then when I got close to the beach, I could smell the forest and that. I put my flashlight on. I'm looking around, and you got to remember, this is my backyard. I've been there for well over going on 20 years, about 15 years by that point. So I'm going along the beach, and all of a sudden I realize, I didn't know where I am now. I'm just at the entrance to Mound Island Bay where my cabin cruiser's anchored out. So I speeded up a bit, ran along the shore. And then, of course, as I get in closer, I slow down, and I can see the lights from the few yachts that are anchored out. They're anchor lights, including my anchor light. And I get through, and there's my boat, tie up, climb inside my bunk, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, having my coffee. And I'm trying to remember what the hell happened last evening. I saw this big black bear. I was picking cockles. I looked at my speedboat. I got like 15 or 20 cockles on the floor, but I can't recollect how the hell I got to that kelp patch. So going back to Happy Camp, and it's one thing that I find now with Sasquatch investigating, I call it the mental Band-Aid. When you get so scared, your mind must have something in there. I don't know if it's endorphins or whatever, but it Band-Aids you so that you don't get too, I guess, in shock or whatever. And that's why people that get, abused or a traumatic airplane crash or car crash, you don't hear them every day talking about being sexually abused or that airplane crash they got into, because it's a memory, but it's a memory that's kind of way back. It's, that's what I call a mental Band-Aid. And with Sasquatch encounters with Happy Camp, that's what I think happened to that logger. He's a big, tough logger working in Northern California. And, he got so scared that he doesn't remember from putting that thing in gear and breaking away from whatever is holding the box of his pickup truck. He doesn't even remember smashing through that fallen down tree or getting to Happy Camp. Something happened from me seeing that long-legged black bear. And then I know another story about a friend who was a clam digger in the same area. And he don't believe in Sasquatches, but he swears to God he's seen the longest-legged black bear of his life walk to the lantern as he's clam digging at low tide on a beach all by himself in the middle of nowhere in the middle of winter. And, and there's so many stories about that. And the reason why I'm going there is because we have to look at, like, as an investigator, I get people that are, telling me that it cloaked, Tom. I tell you it cloaked. Tom, it went through a porthole. I tell you, no word of a lie, it jumped through a porthole. And then you read those other accounts on the internet about there was a UFO seen just after we saw the Sasquatch. And those are the ones that I take with a grain of salt because I'm a critterist. I believe these things are eating, track leaving, defecating, sleeping in nests creatures. I don't believe there's a supernatural cloaking UFO flying, porthole jumping, dimensional traveling entity to the being. And that's where because of what we're talking about is that mental band-aid. And I think that's where the cloaking and the portal jumping and the UFO flying Sasquatches come from, and orb Sasquatches is from people being so scared. And me, I'm a bushman. I'm a modern day bushman that doesn't go to the bush without a gun. And I've lived out there for 26 plus years. I'm going back there again in 10 days for another 2 months. And at one time when my buddy was alive, him and I would finish our summer salmon season, or we'd be building logging roads, and he'd look at me and go, Tom, let's go for a walkabout. He was an Indian guy. And I'm like, yeah, okay. We'd pack our packs, and which was under 40 pounds. And off we'd go up into the top of the mountain, punch through the forest into the alpine. And we'd be up there for sometimes 50 days, even longer, just checking out what we called, the high ground. And we saw things and heard things, not definitively, mainly shadows at night, but we heard things that were out of the ordinary, like tree knocks and tree breaks and whoops and whistles, mimics. But, we weren't scared because him and I both had a gun and knives, and we're bushers. But later on, when I became a Sasquatch investigator and I went out solo, I would notice sometimes I'd get scared. Even before I went to bush, I'd be thinking about all my encounters and, geez, what happens if I have one of those Pallades encounters where I get a missing 411 edition and I don't come back out? And at those times, Bushman kicks in where I go, Tom, quit being so chicken beat. Jump back on that pony. And I'll go to the bush to my old sea kayak camp with cabins, which is now my Sasquatch investigation camp for bringing people out to investigate because there's so much activity there. I'll go stay there alone and sit up until 2 a.m. around my campfire with my shotgun, mind you. But, that's what I'm dealing with, is not being afraid. When you do feel afraid, overcome it. So that in turn, hopefully when I do have that next up and close encounter, I'm not going to mental band-aid and come to you and say, yeah, I think I saw another long-legged black bear. Something happened that night. What happened? I don't know. People say, go get hypnotized, Tom. I'm like, are you kidding? I got so many bloody skeletons in my closet. The last thing I need is me chattering away like a Sasquatch under hypnosis, saying what I did in my past. Can't plead the fifth on some of that stuff,
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because as an investigator, I think it's very important that you have an open mind. When I talk to hundreds of people, and I talked to just a couple of guys recently that I've interviewed for the show, and they've had those encounters where there's the lights, there's the orbs, there's the mind speak, there's the UFO connection. And I used to sort of brush that off and say, habituation sites, for example. I'd talk to people that have these things on their property, and they would talk about lights and orbs in conjunction with seeing Sasquatch. And I used to just file it away into okay, well, there's a couple of weird things happening on their property, and one of them happens to be Bigfoot, and the other one happens to be something with these lights. And I think your explanation makes sense. I think, people deal with things mentally differently when they have those kind of encounters. So that makes sense that people sort of have a really traumatic experience and then they sort of, their mind goes into a different place and they either lose time or there's these other things that come back to them that may or may not have been there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think it's very fascinating that people are having these experiences and then there's these other things. Like you mentioned the little people, and I know you said that's another episode, but we may not get that because you're going out in the bush. So, and I mentioned the little people because I have talked to people time and time again. One of them is a friend of mine who's a paranormal and Bigfoot investigator in Alabama, and he has seen little people in the woods while he's searching for Bigfoot. He has no explanation what they are, but I believe him. I know that he's seen them. What?
Oh yeah, like my language, in my tribe we call them bukwus. It's a small hair-covered bipedal creature, kind of skeletal form, meaning skinny, and it moves like what you see a little dick bird, how they bounce around and move quick, left and right, back and forth. That's how the bukwus is. I'm here in Kent, Washington, south of Seattle right now at my wife's house, but the native tribes here call them the stick people. And it's sort of, bad jub. You don't talk about them. Omaha tribe, you don't talk about the little people. They know they're there. There's numerous reports I got while I was there. And I was actually told to put out an offering of a bowl of shiny candies and shiny coins and some glass diamonds we bought from the dollar store. And damned if half of them weren't gone the next morning. I was out in 6 miles from town by myself at this cabin complex. Now, did someone come at night? I'm a bushman. If I heard a vehicle or another person outside those cabins, I would have woken up. I didn't, but half those things were gone the next day. So they're definitely there. I've had an encounter with them in my traditional territories in a creek. I parked my boat at low tide and I walked up the beach probably a good quarter mile to this graph in the salmon stream to rewind it and change the graph paper measuring the water velocity and height of that creek. And while I was doing that, I walked up, and I'm a bushman. I always look down at tracks, and I seen a bear track here and a deer track and a raccoon track and a river otter track and, whatever. And I got my head in this plywood 5x5 box, changing the graph paper and winding this like an old clock key, winding this thing up. And it's click, 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 as I'm doing it. And my head's in that plywood box, so I can't hear a darn thing. And then when I backed out, I'm putting the lid back on and I just clasped the lock. And all of a sudden I hear this little chattering noise, high pitched and scurrying through the thimbleberries and salmonberries and huckleberries and slowberry bushes. And slough, it's a plant that's all over the Pacific Northwest coastal region. And when you walk through it, it sounds like you're walking through bush with a plastic tarp. It's really noisy, and I could hear that in this chattering. And right away, bushman, I'm like, should have brought my gun. And I'm looking around, and I look down, and there in the sand where my tracks are these little human tracks that are probably, I guess, about 5 inches long with narrow heels, but 5 toes. And right away, it just goes to me, oh, Jesus, that's because the little people. And I hear this, like 5 or 6 of them scurrying on this bank just to around me. And I'm just like, holy Christ. And man, I swear if you went back and measured my footprints going down that beach, they probably would have been 12 feet apart because I was just bucking it. I dove into the speedboat, pushing it out at the same time, and I got the hell out of there. I didn't want nothing to do with those little people because of the bad jub apparently that goes with them if you see them. But, that was my one and only encounter with them out here on the coast. But it was scary. I'm not saying I'm scared of everything in the bush. I'm not. I've taken on my fair share of charging black and grizzly bears and wolves, and I'm still here to talk about it because I never freaked out or ran. I just stood my ground, dropped to my left knee, and started pumping lead into whatever was coming at me. So I'm not afraid of anything in the bush, but it is very unnerving when you're around, whether it be a Sasquatch or the little people, from my experience, without that gun.
Yeah, the little people thing, it fascinates me, and I don't know what to make of it. I can sort of wrap my brain around, I'm in the flesh and blood camp. I think these things are some sort of relic hominin running around.
Oh, yeah.
And the little people thing, it just doesn't compute. But I'm open-minded to everything, man. I take people's stories with a grain of salt, and I don't have anybody on the show that I don't believe. And like I said, I've had some very credible people tell me that they've experienced the little people in the woods. So it's fascinating, man. I'm probably going to do a show one day that's just little people and some of the more weird out there experiences people have. Let me ask you this. You've had some pretty decent, very up close encounters with these things, and it seems to be rather benign. Have you had any aggressive encounters, or do you know of any aggressive encounters that people have had?
Yeah. 06 was definitely aggressive. In my kayak camp, when they rolled, I had a kayak group coming in a couple days. So I took my kayak guide, who was a Holland Dutch boy, and Hugo, and he was early 20s, good looking kid, thought he was a model, always acted like that. And then Ryan, who was a 17-year-old native boy who was working for me. And then my sister, who was a concrete Indian, 10 years younger than me, that she wanted to go stay in my cabin. So we went out there, and it was a really big tide cycle. And I wanted to go there in the late afternoon and cut up all of the driftwood on my beach. That was, our driftwood, some of it's like 3 foot thick and 40 feet long. I wanted to cut it up. And then when that 16-foot high tide came before dark, me and my workers would push all the wood out into the water. And when the tide went down, my sandy beach would be nice and clear for the kayaks in a couple of days. So with the largest still power saw they make, as you know, I'm Canadian, we say still, not steel. And I was cutting away in 2 full tanks. So that's, close to an hour of cutting. Saw ran out of gas on the second time. All the logs are pretty much cut up now. I put the saw down and I hollered at Ryan in the cookhouse behind me, throw me a Pepsi. He threw me a Pepsi. I cracked it. I chugged back about half of it, sat in one of those fold-up lawn chairs and put my Pepsi in the arm holder. And then right then and there, all of a sudden, 2 big cedar trees up the bank from us, 20 feet high, 40 feet away, started shaking like you see on those spook movies, those horror movies, when some demon's head or ghost head shaking real fast. That's what those 2 cedar trees are doing. So I looked at my dog, Land Claims. He was the golden lab who was always with me, totally bush trained, bear hunting trained, you name it. I'm like, Land Claims, get it. And he runs up the bank, which is rock, and he looks behind the 2 cedar trees shaking, and he just all fours squats and just pins himself. So he bounces in midair. He does a 180, hits the ground. He's a tail between the legs, blonde lab streak going past us, looking like he's thinking he's Jesus Christ trying to walk on water because all of the small driftwood's floating, and now he's going across it like he's Jesus Christ trying to walk on water, jumps in the dinghy, and that's it. I'm looking at the 2 trees, and right away I think, okay, don't just look at the trees, look at all your perimeters. So I look to my right behind the cookhouse cabin, and between the V of 2 30-foot cedar trees is this, we would measure the next day, 7'4" to 7'6" male Sasquatch looking eyeball to eyeball at me, and probably 60, 70 feet away. And it just gives me this big pissed off grimace where you see his tendons and his wrinkles and his muscles and his eyes squint. The guy, it looks like that big guy at the pool table when you're about to get ready to go rolling outside and do a punch out dance with the person. That's what the Sasquatch looked. And I'm like, Jesus. I'm like, Ryan, give me my gun. Your gun's out in the tour boat, which was anchored in the bay. And I'm like, well, give me a knife, an axe, something. So he tosses a machete towards me, and I grab it. And I look at my sister. I'm like, get in that dinghy now. And I tell Ryan, you and Hugo, get in the other dinghy and get out to the boat. My sister, when she ran for the dinghy, my dog looked like Jesus Christ. She was Jesus Christ, because I swear she was walking on water on that floating wood when she got to the dinghy. And I'm sitting there, slow down, you're going to break your leg. And then I get in the dinghy, and she starts pulling on the beach line, going to my boat to keep the stern pointing to the beach because of the wind and waves. Damn near flips us in the rectangle duck punt. I'm telling her to settle down. We get on the boat. Hugo almost falls overboard because he's crying and blubbering. He's so scared. And then you start hearing 2 of them roaring, like just, like they were mad. We get in the boat. We leave. We have to go stay at the dock, sleep in the boat. We're all wet. But, my sister wouldn't let me go anywhere near my camp. And I couldn't make it back to port because of the tide rips and big evening breeze, about 35 to 40. So we stayed at this dock across channel. And the religious woman, like devout religious. And you know what, respectfully, what religious people are like, it's plain cut and dry, black and white. If it's a bad thing, then it's a demon. Well, when we were telling her about the Sasquatch encounter we just had and how we got chased out of her camp, as she's giving us blankets, she starts shivering and she goes, "Oh, I don't like those demons. They come here from time to time too." Well, this is a homesteader woman that single mom who brought her daughter up until she was a teenager, running British Columbia's oldest post office out in the middle of Timbuk nowhere. And here she's telling me about how she doesn't like the demons because they come to her place from time to time to scream like demons. So that was a pretty sketchy time. We had a big rogue come at us at my Sasquatch investigation camp one night. I wasn't awake. Probably fortunate I wasn't, because I probably would have probably had to defend myself and my guests and had to put some lead in it. But apparently it came and just shoved its head. This is an 8-foot door. Above the door, whatever you call that, gable or area or whatever, well, that piece of wood was knocked out, so it was open above the 8-foot door, 7 or 8-foot door, whatever their height is. But this thing apparently had to bend down to shove its head above the door where that opening was, and it just sniffing like that, where my buddy with his blonde-haired, skinny, high-pitched, chirpy-voiced wife was, and their 3 young children, which one of them was a young girl and 2 young boys. So that big rogue went out of 5 cabins. It went straight to the one 2 hours after we all went to bed that night, to the one that had the children and the blonde-haired woman. And to me, that's just not random. That thing was scouting on us, watching us as we were around the campfire. And then at night, when it figured we were sleeping, while they can hear us REM sleep and snoring, it went in to smell and get a closer inspection. Hopefully that's all it was trying to do.
Yeah, I've heard these things are time and time again. They seem to be fascinated with women and children in particular, which always sort of creeps me out a little bit. I've heard stories of kids saying these things look in their windows and they're motioning to, like they want them to come outside, and that never gives me a good feeling, man. That always makes me a little creeped out. The child thing, just, I don't know what it is, but I know you've got some things going on now. What do you have going on as far as investigations, or what are you working on now?
Oh God. I do year-round investigations, either Washington State or Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And the way I operate, because I've done tourism most of my adult life, I don't have schedules. You're going to be my guest, my client. What do you want? What is your budget? What are your expectations? So basically, you just go to SasquatchIsland.com, send me an email, give me a phone call. If you go to my Facebook group, Sasquatch Island, a lot of my posts have my phone number, and it tells you if I'm either in the U.S. or Canada, what cell to use. And email is the best. Just tell me to phone you. You want to do an expedition in Washington State or Canada, and we'll talk. And I put it together, and then I always tell people, look, it's the cost this much for you, but we can make it cheaper and more adventurous. So in other words, if you go to Vancouver Island and you want to go to my Sasquatch research camp, well, pick me up. We'll go in there. It's, a couple $100 a day for you. And it's, I do the cooking and everything and share everything. But if you want extras, if you want to go on a kayak expedition because I have a fleet, or you want to rent a yacht or a commercial fish boat or a water taxi to get further afield. We got one expedition coming up here in August where we're going to an alpine above timber and just up north of Campbell River, and it's on the mainland, and it's a hot spot of Sasquatch activity I've been following for well over 25 years, and recently there's been some heavy activity. So we're going to go get helicopter dropped, hopefully in that alpine, and spend a week to 10 days up there. And we're going to be able to see 3 directions from that top of that mountain. So, and there's 3 lakes up there with a lot of alpine. So there's a good chance we're going to see something, especially with the fleurs. It just opens up so much more. So I do that. And then I'm a member of Monster X Radio, monsterxradio.com. But it's the YouTube channel, Monster X Radio, that you can go to, and please slap the subscribe button like a disrespectful Sasquatch investigator gets slapped upside the head by a rogue Sasquatch. And so that, it's all about what you're doing too. We want more followers. It's all about that, more clicks and subscribers. But it's free. And you go on there to Monster X on YouTube and you watch our video casts, listen to the podcasts, even with monsterxradio.com. We got all my archival Sasquatch Island podcasts on there, and I've been doing them for over 3 years. And I cover a lot of things. Most of what I cover, you're not going to hear anywhere else, because I've been a bushman all my life. I've been a commercial fisherman. I've been an Indian for 56 years, involved with that culture and heritage. And me being, I don't go, like I always tell people, no offense to listeners, please don't waste your time. Try not to go into the pubic hair of North America. That means the forest. You're not going to come up spades on a Sasquatch. Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson, they came up spades and captured one. The chances of getting them in that thick forest is next to impossible. Try to get on the riverbanks, the sandbars, the alpines, the scrublands. But on the Pacific Northwest, get out to the low tides, big low tides at night where the shellfish beaches are. And in the late summer, early fall, cornfields. Been finding the Sasquatches love cornfields and apple orchard areas. So it's that equation that I always teach to people. The highest abundance of seasonal protein that a Sasquatch can fill their stomach and their hands up in the least amount of time with the least amount of calories expended. That's where you're going to find Sasquatch. So in the middle of a forest where we know from the biologists and ecologists that there's low protein abundance, you're not going to come across Sasquatches. They're going to be on the move constantly looking for dick birds, squirrels, deer, elk, whatever to feed that big belly. But if you find an area where there's a high accumulation of protein, cornfield, orchard, shellfish beach, area where ranchers got sheep and goats, the chances of open area and coming across that Sasquatch with your cell phone to record it or your FLIR is going to be better. So stay out of the yarn basket pubic hair in North America. Get into the open areas of high protein. That's the best advice I can give you. And we're doing that. And we're coming up spades. I got some good pictures. They're blob squatches. I got some good FLIRs. They're blobby FLIRs. And because of all the negative nillies out there and whiners, I don't like posting everything. But if you communicate with me, I'd be happy to send it to you on, whether it be a text message with a picture or a video clip. I'll be happy to share it with you. I just ask you don't share it on social media because all the whiners out there.
What about your art? Where can people go and find your artwork?
I guess best one is YouTube Tom Sewid, Sewid. That's my personal YouTube. Or go to my Facebook group, Sasquatch Island. I post it all there. And, send me a text message. That's the best way because I got all my art on my cell phone. So if you text me at my American cell, 206-604-3303, I'll be happy to text you 30, 40 pictures of my native art, a lot of it Sasquatch attributed. And today we just produced our newest Sasquatch Island logo bumper sticker that we're going to be selling here. So you just get a hold of me, you'll see it. It's actually my new banner on Sasquatch Island now. It's pretty cool. It's a native Tonopah face, male, and it has Sasquatch Island and 4 footprints going across the letters.
I definitely encourage everybody to go check Tom's stuff out on Facebook. Excellent stories, man. You certainly didn't disappoint. I really appreciate your time, and I thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me. And, definitely reach out to me. Get me on again. We'll talk about little people.
Absolutely, man. And that's it for tonight's show, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you guys next week.